Hi, you're live.
All right. For any of you out there in YouTube land, just be patient. We ran into a couple of technical issues like we often do. And yeah, Natalie? Natalie? We're just waiting for sound. Can we get some sound on the mic? Is there something I need to do here? Hello, hello, hello. Hi, Shelley. All right, testing. All right, here we go. I think we're good. All right. All right, so we need to just stay close to this mic. All right, I think we are almost there. Okay, greetings. Oh. Greetings all, and greetings to those of you who are watching from wherever you may be online. We are streaming onto YouTube, and I'm going to turn my phone off so I don't have to answer the phone while I'm talking to you guys. And all right. Greetings. It took a little bit. By the way, Shelley, I said hello to you before, but I don't think you heard me. Hi everyone, and welcome to the first Friday night of the month here at SoulFood Coffeehouse in scenic Redmond, Washington, the bicycle capital of the world. Did you know that? Whatever the hell that means. It's because we have a velodrome bicycle racing thing over at Merriamore Park, I think. Anyhow, we are here on a beautiful evening, and we are graced with a bit of magic tonight. And it's not me, although with a little luck, I will be a, what's the correct word? Medium. I will be a halfway point between it and you. And it is this amazing chart we have of the moment, which is, if we had started 10 minutes ago, and actually just because we can, I'm going to back this up. How do I get me out of the way here? There we go. If we back this up just a few minutes ago, at 6:35, when we kind of were aiming to start at, we have a very rare partile, and for those of you who are not astrology geeks, a partile aspect is when two planets are at the same number degree. So for example, we have Venus at 27 degrees and 35 minutes, but it's at 27 degrees of the sign of Cancer. And by the way, when you see a notation like this, Venus at 27 degrees, 35 minutes of the sign of Cancer, it's in the 28th degree, just like when you've celebrated your 24th birthday party, you're in your 25th year. 0 birthday parties, you're in your first year of life. So this is actually the 28th degree of the sign of Cancer, just as long as I'm starting off geeking out on you guys. So we have Venus at 27 degrees and then some of the sign of Cancer. We have Neptune at 27.5 degrees, 27 degrees and 28 minutes of Pisces. And we have the moon at 27 degrees and 59 minutes, just like minutes in an hour, there are 59 minutes in a degree. So I back this up just to show you how close we are to what we would call a partile. Partile means the same degree, 27, 27, 27. We have a partile grand trine when 3 planets are equidistant from one another, just like an equilateral triangle is a triangle with the same sides all the way around, or 60-degree angles all the way around. Here we have an equilateral triangle, and the astrology word for triangle is trine. And so we have a grand triangle or grand trine in the element of water, because the whole system of astrology is based upon elements: fire, thinking; fire, earth, sensing; fire, earth, air. What did we do? We did that wrong. Let's start all over again. Fire is action. It's intuition. Fire doesn't think about where it's going to burn next. It just burns. Fire, immediate response, intuition. Fire, earth is senses. Fire, earth, air. Air is thinking. Fire, earth, air, water. Water is emotions. So when you have 2 planets that are 1/3 of a circle apart, they are in the same element. And we have here planets in Cancer water, Scorpio water, and Neptune water. What does this mean? Well, we look at first the element. Water is feeling, it's emotional. So there is an emotional energy that is predominating right now. And yet with a grand trine, it's like that energy just keeps running around. So it's like a closed circuit TV. For anyone here who has a grand trine in their birth chart, it's like, it doesn't matter how good or how bad your life is, you can go back to your home, back to your room. Natalie or someone, can I get a glass of water? Oh, hi, can I get a glass of water when you get a chance? Thank you. It doesn't matter how screwed your life is or how amazing it is. You get back to your room, you're alone, and you can turn on your emotion or your closed circuit TV. And if it's a water grand trine, it's playing your feelings. You're okay, no matter what. If you have a grand air trine, it's like closed circuit intellectual TV. If you have a grand earth trine, it's like closed circuit sensible sensation. I got it. We got it covered. He grabbed it. Thank you, though, anyhow. Thanks. So we first see that there is kind of this closed circuit, TV show playing, but it's not ours personally. It's the cosmos and what planets are involved. Well, here the planets are actually a very special trio, because the slowest moving of the planets is Neptune, the one that looks like the Neptune's trident here. And Neptune is about our dreams, our imagination. Neptune is also about anything that's been falsified from reality. Why? Well, because that's what our dreams and our imagination does. We see something out there and we go, wow, that's so beautiful. We're putting the word beautiful onto it. And so Neptune has to do with our imagination, and yet imagination is the way in which we subjectify an allegedly objective reality. So we have Neptune, the planet of dreams and illusions and fantasy and spirituality, and it's being harmonized by Venus in a trine, very, very close trine, that because Neptune moves so slowly, Venus is really in that trine with Neptune pretty much all day. Pretty much all day today on June 2nd. but it was exact at 3:42 p.m. Pacific time was when that trine was exact. And Venus and Neptune have a very special relationship. In astrology, you can think of planets, although we normally see them as particles. You know, like you look up in the sky after sunset now and you can see Venus hanging out in the western sky. It's a particle. When we see the moon at night, it's like a particle. They're big particles. I actually have a term for them. I call them BFPs, big fucking particles. All right, so these are particles, but they're also waves because they travel like waves. The moon is 13 waves or 13 cycles a year, and so on. And in astrology, there's this concept, like in music, that we call the octave. And the faster moving planets, like Mercury, Venus, and Mars, all have a higher octave planet that's a slower moving planet. Technically, it would be in music, a lower octave. But here's the deal. Neptune is the higher octave of Venus. Those two planets are very different because Venus moves around the sun in less than a year, and Neptune takes 165 years to move around the sun once. So they're very different, except they're both related to a special key word. And that, anyone want to guess what that key word is? Anyone?
Is it girls?
If you're a guy wanting one, yes. Love. It's love. How is it love? Well, Venus is the planet of love. It's more than that, but Venus is I love you. Venus is our basic attractions, desires. It's not our needs. Our needs are food, water, shelter. Food, water, shelter. Yeah, that would do it. But our desires are more about pleasure, seeking sensual of the senses. And Venus is that personal embodiment of beauty or of aesthetic perfection or pleasure. And that idea of beauty then brings in the imagination, as we talked about with Neptune, but with Venus, it's personal. It's I love you. That's Venus. Neptune is like an old psychedelic Peter Max poster from the 1960s that has rainbows and unicorns, and across the top there's a capital L, capital O, capital V, capital E. Love. Because that's very different than the I love you. It's agape. It's the love that we would have for our spiritual guide or God of choice. And so Venus and Neptune are very similar resonances, but they work very, very differently. And even though Neptune in the Greek mythology is a male god, the Greeks had a hard time giving, I think, the term God to any female. It was maybe one of the original strongly patriarchal societies. And of course, astrology comes out of a patriarchal origin. So we need to keep that in mind. But Neptune is the god of the oceans. Everything is dissolved back into the seas, whether they're the water seas on Earth or whether they're the seas of consciousness. So Neptune is really it's a feminine energy. It receives everything. It holds everything. And Venus, of course, is one of the two goddesses or feminine energies in the Greek mythology. What is the other one? The moon. This is why this grand trine is so special. It's because we have Venus and its higher octave, Neptune, and the third feminine energy, the moon, because the moon is how we care for, it's how we nurture. Anyone here have a Cancer, born with the Cancer sun or a Cancer moon? I have a Cancer moon. It's what makes us care even when we don't want to. That's another story. Anyhow, so we start this month off with a very interesting scenario. We start the month off with this grand trine on tonight, actually today, with the moon sweeping through it much faster because the moon moves about a degree every couple of hours. So this is I mean, right now at the beginning of this talk is as tight and as close as this whole scenario is going to get, because as we move to now, we can see that the moon has already moved a degree or a little bit less than that, but it's already moving along that will make this whole thing settle down. So if you are in a relationship, or if you have people around you after you leave tonight, tell them you love them. I mean, that would be a good use of astrology, just to remember to connect to these deeper issues. Now, there's another thing that's very important about June, and we're going to talk about June kind of overall, and then we'll kind of fine tune into a couple of specific charts. But the other thing about June has to do with the planet Mercury. Does anybody know what I'm going to say about Mercury? Mercury is actually in Taurus, and it's been in Taurus for a while. Does anyone know why Mercury has been in Taurus for a while? Normally, Mercury blows through a sign in about 2 weeks because it was retrograde. Now, when a planet is retrograde, from Earth's point of view, it looks like it's moving backwards. It's just a trick of perspective. It's not really moving backwards. It's like if you line up with something right now, if I'm looking directly at the camera, it's lined up with those blue lights over there. But if I move this way, it looks like it's now lined up with something before it. In other words, the perspective is such that when any planet comes close to Earth, it looks like it's moving backwards. Now, when a planet goes retrograde, let's just imagine the microphone here is us on Earth, and it looks like Mercury comes across that point, and then as it looks like it goes backwards, it turns retrograde. It goes back across that point again. It's now moving backwards. It's covering territory it's already been over. And then it turns direct, as it did a couple of weeks ago. And then it goes direct. It's moving forward again, but it's moving through that same area that it already moved through forward and backward. All planets do this, all real planets, meaning everything except for the sun and the moon have this retrograde energy or motion. But here's the deal. Mercury was going this way. There's a spot at which it then looked like it started going backwards. And then there was a spot at which it turns forward. And then it's traveling through this area that it's been over 1, 2, 3 times. That area we astrologers call the shadow of that planet. It doesn't really exist up there. But on May 31st, Mercury reached the point in the sky where it turned retrograde. And that point now means that Mercury, as of June 1st, is moving into new territory. It's been going direct for 2 weeks, but now it's moving forward direct, and for the first time stepping into territory it hasn't been in this whole cycle. So the exciting thing about June is that Mercury, from June 1st all the way through the end of the month, is moving into new territory. What does this mean? Well, Mercury is how we think, it's how we talk, it's how we communicate, it's how we listen, it's how we process thoughts. And Mercury has 2 ways of doing that. It's 2 signs that it's connected to. In Gemini, where Mercury is at home, Mercury just plays that old game of connecting the dots. Doesn't care what the information or data is, it just wants to connect this with that. And if you know people, anyone here have Gemini rising or Gemini sun or moon or anything? So apparently Nicholas has 4 things, or he has four fingers in Gemini. But if you know people who are Gemini, typically they talk a lot, or they communicate a lot, or or they're curious. This is a great Gemini word, because Gemini, with Mercury in Gemini in that mode, is basically just wanting to connect the dots. I'm curious, how does this fit with that? Now, the other side of Mercury is Virgo. Any Virgos here? Oh, a bunch. Okay. In Virgo, Mercury is still about thinking, it's language, it's communication. But unlike Gemini, that's curious and wants to connect every dot with every dot, Mercury, in its other way, of expressing in Virgo only wants to find what's useful, and it wants to connect only useful things to other useful things. And again, Gemini is an air sign, and so that's just about thinking. Virgo is an earth sign, that's about sensible, that's about practical. So Mercury works in two ways. I think of it as AM radio in Gemini and FM radio in Virgo. AM radio is noisy, it's talk radio, you tune, you listen to a station, you yell back at it and say, you're a jerk and I'm done with you, or I hate that song, and you tune another station. AM radio is amplitude modulation, it's loud, it's inefficient, but it was the first form of radio. You get static, with FM radio, frequency modulation, you can pack so much information into one signal, think Virgo, that you can broadcast stereo music on two sounds on one station. And instead of being 530 or on your radio dial, or 1620 thousand cycles a second, kilohertz, instead of that, it's 93.4, because Virgo is exact. And people, when they have listened to FM radio, most people have their station. That's what I listen to. Rather than on AM, you tune and you see what's around. So this idea of Mercury moving into new territory, it really covers both ways. It's how we think, it's how we communicate, it's how we listen, it's how we language things, it's how we connect things to other things. And for the first time in several months, in a couple of months, Mercury is moving into new territory. And this means that our logical process, our communication with people in our lives, the things that we're reading, kind of feel like we're getting somewhere, we're moving into new territory. It's definitely about progress. So we have this whole thing in June of Mercury moving forward. It's still in Taurus. And Mercury in Taurus, it's still about communication, but it's about basic communication, because Taurus is like the bull that, I mean, it can charge when it gets angry, but it mostly just plods along. And if you know any Tauruses, you know that Newton's third law, an object at rest tends to stay at rest. This is a Taurus, or an object in motion tends to stay in motion. I always think if you have a Taurus in your life and they're laying on the couch and you go, Bill, you promised you'd mow the lawn. I'm watching TV now, and I'll do it later. Because an object at rest tends to stay at rest. Trying to get a Taurus to do something is impossible. However, once Bill starts mowing that lawn and gets going, you go out and you go, hey, Bill, I just put some food on the table for lunch. Maybe this is a bad example because Taurus is like food, but the real Taurus will go, no, I need to finish this before I quit, because a Taurus is an object in motion, tends to stay in motion. With Mercury in Taurus for the past few weeks, and for the next couple of weeks, week and a half, it actually leaves Taurus on the 11th, I think. Yes, the 11th. That's the way we've been thinking. We've been following through on those things that we think about. And again, we all wear these cosmic energies slightly differently based upon our own charts. However, we're all slowed down and more determined while Mercury is moving through Taurus. But on June 11th, a little bit of magic occurs up there in the sky. And we're going to look at the chart for June 11th in a few minutes. We have one other chart to look at on the way. But the deal is that on June 11th, Mercury leaves Taurus and enters Gemini. Gemini is its home sign, one of two home signs. Mercury in Gemini is like, I was going to say it's like a house on fire, but that would be Aries, but it's like someone who has thoughts coming and ideas and communication and is ultimately curious. I mean, I think that Mercury in Gemini is a classic example of what I like to call an information slut. There's no discrimination. And that's good. I mean, this is not about information slut shaming. I can't even say that. Say that 3 times fast. It's not about that. because there's something that's amazing. We all know people who just are pieces of, they know a little bit about everything. There are some people who have accused me of that. I don't know a lot about most things, but I know a little. I have Gemini rising. And the idea of that Gemini, Mercury in Gemini, is just gathering information, because the more information you have, the better off you are. Not true, especially if the information that you have is totally made up. But a Gemini, or that Mercury in Gemini, doesn't really care. It's just about the data. It's just about the information. One might make a note that our past president, the orange guy, was a Gemini. But then again, so is someone like Bob Dylan, another classic Gemini. They're always changing. They have words for anything and everything. But Geminis are also the con artists of the zodiac. I mean, why? Because they have no problem in using information, whether it's true or not. Dylan, in his early days, would do two publicity, what do you call them? News conferences. Where's my brain? He would do two news conferences on the same day, and people would ask him questions, and he would give them completely different answers for the same question that couldn't both be true. I mean, stories about, so tell us about your childhood. And he would just make up shit. Like, that's a classic Gemini. Incidentally, Paul McCartney is another Gemini, someone who's not necessarily deep compared to many artists, but clever and versatile. These are Gemini words, and can make stuff up. So we have Mercury going into its home sign of Gemini on June 11th, and it'll stay there until the 26th. So by the end of the month, Mercury will be in the next sign, Cancer, where it becomes a bit quieter. It becomes a bit more indrawn. It becomes a bit more emotionally oriented rather than just noise. I would imagine that over the next few weeks, while Mercury is in Gemini, we'll hear a lot of noise from the media. Not that we don't usually. So this is one of the things about the month, is that we're really moving into new territory, and most of the month has Mercury in Gemini. And so we're going to be really hyped up on words, on information, on thoughts, on communication. That's going to be exciting. We also have Venus and Mars, like Mercury, also moving direct into new territory, which they have been for a while. This sets up the fundamental paradox about the month, because we have the slower moving outer planets not only moving slowly, but one of them having already turned retrograde, that would be Pluto, and Saturn and Neptune both slowing down to turn retrograde. You see, if you think about that retrograde motion like a pendulum on a clock, the planets from our point of view, although they're going around like this, we see their motion like this as they're going around. And in order for a pendulum on a clock to change directions, as it gets to the top of one swing, it slows down until it's not moving. We astrologers call that a station, or a stationary planet. Then it changes directions, but it moves really slowly. And then as it falls, it begins to pick up speed until it's going maximum halfway through. And then on the other side, it begins to slow again. So we have several outer planets that have either recently changed directions by apparent observation. They don't really do that. Or are about to. And that puts this whole, that saying, slower than molasses in January? Because when molasses is heated, it pours like water. But in January, you wouldn't want to have to walk through waist-deep molasses because it's very thick. Okay, that's what the outer planets are doing right now. And this sets up the dynamic for the month. I'm calling it, is this month progress or retreat, or progress or review? On one level, we feel like we're running headstrong ahead, and at another level, our feet are somehow stuck in the back in the past, and we're not actually getting anywhere. It's like standing in the ocean, in a good, healthy, wild ocean, not like in Puget Sound, but out on the coast. And the tide's coming in. And yet every wave that comes in, you can feel the undertow kind of pulling you out. And so that's kind of what this month is all about. That kind of that kind of dichotomy between the inner and the outer moving planets. So there's another thing that we want to look at when we look at the month ahead, and we'll talk in a moment about the specific retrograde movements, or the stationary retrogrades. That means they're holding still and then going backward. What that happens for let me just get this right here. So yeah, so Neptune goes retrograde on the last day of the month. And it does it at 27 degrees and 41 minutes of Pisces. Do you see where Neptune is right now? It's at 27 degrees and 28 minutes of Pisces. This means that in an entire month, Neptune is slowing down. It barely moves 1/6 of a degree. That's 1/6 of 1/360th of a circle. Neptune, for all practical purposes, ain't moving. But it doesn't technically turn retrograde until the last day of the month. Now, Saturn also is turning retrograde this month. It right now is at just barely 7 degrees of Pisces. I say just barely, it's at 7 degrees Pisces and 2 minutes. On June 17th, Saturn turns retrograde at 7 degrees Pisces and 13 minutes, meaning that it has not even moved a quarter of a degree in 2 weeks, over 2 weeks. By the end of the month, Saturn is at 7 degrees of Pisces and 5 minutes, backing up. So if you look at the entire month of June, Saturn, from the beginning of the month to the end of the month, moves forward, forward and then backward to almost back where it is right now, barely at all. This is so important to understand because Saturn is the planet that has to do with things that are real. What do I mean by that? I mean, things that you accomplish in your life, things that you do, projects that you complete. They have to do with things like roads and bridges and government and laws. And Saturn is Saturn's like dad. Saturn is the tester. Did you do your homework? You didn't? Well, you need to do your homework now. This is what Saturn does in our life. Saturn is like the cop that stops us for speeding. When we go too fast or get out of hand, Saturn comes in and throws something in our life. Sometimes we don't know why. Sometimes we don't think we deserved it. But Saturn is the thing that slows us down or stops us. And when Saturn is stationing and turning retrograde, it may feel like a lot of our progress that we've made on deep, not just thinking things like making plans or ideas, that would be Mercury, but things on life level really slow down, and or we realize we're not ready to quit our job and move to Costa Rica, even though we were hoping to do that, this summer. All of a sudden, Saturn turns retrograde, and we realize, geez, this is going to take me until maybe over the winter or even next spring. I'm talking about those kinds of level of things. The other thing that occurs this month is that Pluto, which is the slowest moving of the planets that we astrologers normally look at, Pluto takes 248 years to go around once. In fact, the United States is having its Pluto birthday. We celebrate our sun anniversary every year. We call it our birthday. From Earth's point of view, your birthday is when the Earth has completed one trip around the sun, which makes it look like the sun has completed one trip around the zodiac. Many of us know what the Saturn return is. That's like our Saturn birthday. From Earth's point of view, Saturn has made one complete journey around the sun. And on our Saturn birthday, doesn't matter how accomplished we are or famous or precocious, on our Saturn birthday, we grow up. There's something different about people over 30 and under 30. And it has to do with that Saturn cycle of maturity, responsibility. Typically around our Saturn birthday, we do Saturnine things, or if we don't, I mean, there's people who hold a totally irresponsible life. Look at the famous stars and rock and rollers. The Jim Morrisons and we can all make a list. The Kurt Cobains and the and so on. These are people who have not taken that responsibility, and a Saturn return can, in fact, take someone out. The deal, though, is that most people at their Saturn return, they typically buy a home if they've never owned one. They get married, they get divorced, they have kids, they change jobs, they go back to school, they take a new career. It's something usually that puts us in a long-term direction. And yet, just as often as something that we do, it's just as often something that we don't do or didn't do. And then halfway through the next cycle, we're paying for it because we wish mid-30s and then early 40s, when these cycles kind of come back up, we kind of look back and go, God, if I'd only gone back to school then, or if I didn't rob the bank, then I wouldn't be sitting in jail for these 7 years or whatever. I'm not saying that out of personal experience. I'm just, okay. I'm not even saying I've never robbed a bank. But being the con artist, Gemini rising that I am, I've never been caught. Okay, so Pluto is right now returning to where it was when the USA was born. It's a Pluto, it's a United States of America's Pluto birthday, birthday one. Pluto, unlike Saturn, is about making things real. Pluto is about taking those things that are the most real and deconstructing them so it can reconstruct them. Astrologers often think of Pluto as the planet of death. But death doesn't come without rebirth. Pluto is about the hidden realms, the hell realms, not the hell where you get punished. That's kind of a Judeo-Christian invention. In some cultures, like in the Tibetan culture, our version of hell is one of a whole sequence of metaphysical, meaning non-physical worlds that we go through when we're not encumbered by physicality. In fact, most modern astrologers fully understand that Pluto is Latin for Hades, which is hell. And Pluto sat on the throne of the hell realms. Most modern astrologers understand that the metaphor for hell is actually everything that's not expressed here on the surface, meaning the unconscious mind. When you look at the work of the psychoanalytic, analytical psychology, the Freud, Jung, that whole depth psychology thing, that's a study in basically the therapy involves using Mercury, communication, to go into the hell realms to rescue those things which have been sent there or abducted. And this is based upon a Greek mythological story of Persephone, who was the daughter of Ceres, Ceres, the queen of the grain, Ceres, cereal, that word comes from Ceres. And that's cereal, not as in serial killer, but as in cereal like cornflakes eater. Anyhow, Pluto comes along and abducts Ceres' daughter, who's a queen in training, and he makes her queen of the underworld. I don't want to get far into that whole mythology, except that Mercury's real job in the Greek pantheon was he was the psychopomp. A psychopomp is basically the being that is the guide that leads souls through the between worlds, from this world into the underworld and back. And so when we do talk therapy, we're using Mercury to go and rescue our Persephones. It's a brilliant metaphor. It's not mine. It comes from the work of a British astrologer named David Harding. So back to Pluto. On our Saturn return, we do things like we establish a career, we get married, we do things that are real. Pluto, on the other hand, is about not death, but death and rebirth. It's the hidden part of the cycle. It brings things up that were hidden. And so on the Pluto return, Pluto's job is to deconstruct so that it can reconstruct in a new way. If you think of a caterpillar becoming a butterfly, what's in between the two of them? Pluto. Why? Because the caterpillar and butterfly have nothing really visible that's obvious between them. It's not just like a changing someone's clothes. It's like a total structural metamorphosis. And so while Pluto has for the last 15, 16 years been in the sign of Capricorn, Capricorn being one of Saturn's signs about fundamental reality, structure. And we see, and structure includes banks, government, roads, post office, things that have to do with outside structure. Perhaps maybe in the United States, our fundamental structure in the United States is the Constitution. Government is structure. And for the last run of Pluto moving through Capricorn, we've seen all those things that we thought were immutable structures kind of disintegrate. I have some astrologer friends who call Pluto fondly Roto-Rooter. You see, because when you call Roto-Rooter, when your pipes are plugged, it doesn't care what it gets the shit out. And so Pluto, as it's been moving through Capricorn, has been basically deconstructing all of these things that are supposed to be fundamental. And incidentally, in 2008, when Pluto first moved from Sagittarius into Capricorn, retrograde back into Sagittarius and then into Capricorn, we had a financial meltdown. We had the whole real estate collapse and a global financial collapse at that point in time. And within just a few days of Pluto leaving Capricorn and entering the next sign, Aquarius, which it did earlier this year in March, within a few days of that, we had a bank collapse again. And one might suggest, now that Pluto is retrograding, as it has been since the middle of May, since the middle of April, Pluto is now on June 11th, will retrograde back into Capricorn, where it will stay for the rest of the year, kind of finishing up, destroying all the things it didn't do. Not that the destruction is the thing to think about, because the destruction is what needs to occur. The caterpillar needs to go in order to create the butterfly. And this is the phase in which we are in right now in the United States of America, whether we realize it or not. This is not about the evening news one day. It's not about 1 month. It's a process that's years, because a Pluto transition, it's slow. It's a 250-year cycle. I mean, compare that with the moon that runs around the zodiac once a month. I mean, we get used to that cycle. No one here has ever lived through an entire Pluto cycle, but the United States has, and it's having its Pluto birthday. And it's not like Saturn. It's not just getting a new job or making a commitment. It's dealing with watching the entire fabric decay, deconstruct, fall apart so that it can be reconstructed. And in June, on June 11th, Pluto backs into Capricorn. Now, for the few months that it's been in Aquarius, it moved into Aquarius in March for the first time in 230 years. When Pluto moved into Aquarius, within a few days, ChatGPT got everyone's attention. And Pluto in Aquarius, Aquarius is the sign of the future. You know, we've all heard of the age of Aquarius, which really is still likely a good 100 years away. But ages move even slower than Pluto. They're based upon a 25,000-year cycle of the Earth's backwards wobble, the precession of the equinox, for those of you who are geeky enough to care. So when Pluto moved into Aquarius, we got these early warning signals. It was only there for a couple of months. It was there for March into April, into May, and now into June, 3 months total. It's now backing into Capricorn. But we got these little signals of what the future might bring, including technology, including restructuring of political systems, because in Aquarius, it's not about bringing down the old. Pluto is about reorganizing humanity. And we may see, whether we like it or not, or think it's a good idea or not, we may see an entire wave that we can't even imagine now. I mean, if you go back 30 years ago, no one could imagine what life would be with the internet. And now none of us can imagine what life would be without the internet. And as Pluto moves through Aquarius over the next 20 years in one sign, we will see not only artificial intelligence take a role that will probably change, I'd say, take the probably out, that will change our lives even more than the internet occurring. That's how big this is going to be. Artificial intelligence, one thing. Artificial reality, augmented reality. All of this is going to become more and more part of what our daily lives are, whether we like it or not. And certainly the other thing that we are going to be contending with Pluto and Aquarius will be increased globalization. I mean, we've already seen this begun to unfold, and I don't think any of us can predict exactly how it will. Meanwhile, getting back to June, we're not getting there yet. You know, we got all this first wave of excitement and or fear. And now for those of us, probably those of them who have been most afraid of wanting to make things as great as they were before, instead of wanting to make the future great. You know, going back, it's because of fear of the future, fear of the larger processes that are unfolding. So if we look at this chart, we're going to now focus a little bit on the chart itself. But I wanted to give you a flavor of how 2023 in itself is a bit of a turning point. But March of 2023 really pushed us forward. And now in June, we're going to, in our minds, be still racing ahead, but we're going to realize that we're not getting there yet. We got a whole bunch of other stuff with Pluto retrograding back into Capricorn, with Saturn turning retrograde, and with Neptune slowing down to turn retrograde at the end of the year. These things are all basically going to be like sludge, thicker than just water. So here we have the chart for the first of the, actually for the second of the month, and I'm going to just move this ahead a day at a time by magic. Oh, if our astrologers of the past could watch this, they'd go, I mean, it would take an astrologer a couple of days to calculate a chart, because they'd have to go out and do measurements at night. And then they'd have to use all kinds of crazy mathematical tools, including the solution of spherical triangles and logarithms. And all we have to do is push a button. I'm sorry I keep ignoring you guys. Don't take it personally. The microphone is aimed this way, but every now and then I realize that there's people over here too. And the same for you folks out there and wherever you are. And that in itself is an interesting thing. I mean, there's a whole branch of astrology called horary astrology, the astrology of the hour, that you don't use a birth chart. When a client comes to an astrologer and the astrologer says, I just put my house up for sale, will it sell? The astrologer draws a chart for that moment in space and time and looks at that moment and uses that as a tool to divine an answer. So let's say you're in a Zoom meeting with someone in South Africa who asks a question. Where are you? Just saying, it's a problem. You get on a Zoom meeting with 10 people from all over the country or all over the world. And it's like, first of all, I'd like to thank you all for coming here, wherever here is. All right. And by the way, because of that, when I look at charts, in this kind of situation, I always use what's called an Aries rising chart. A normal chart, this would be the horizon. The ascendant, descendant axis would define where the horizon, where the above and below the Earth is. And this is an absolutely important primary tool. It's what determines your rising sign or ascendant. And there may be nothing more important in a birth or natal chart. However, there are people who are going to be watching this from all over the world. And so whenever I do this kind of work online, I always use a chart that has no horizon in it. So each of the houses, these sectors, simply correspond with the natural order of their signs. It always begins here on the eastern point. And east and west are opposite what they are on a map. Why? Because I'm looking at a map like this, but if I'm looking at the sky and I'm looking up, everything's flipped. And so any planet in Aries is going to be in this first house, Taurus, Gemini, and so on all the way around. So, all right, we're going to move this ahead a day at a time. And I want you to watch the moon, because we are coming into a very potent full moon actually tomorrow. And the moon moves about a half a sign a day, a little bit less than that actually. And so we click this ahead one day, and you can see that thick red line between the moon and the sun. And if we were to make this exact, we would make this be 8:41 p.m. And we'll just do that 8:40. That's 8:44, 8:41 p.m. And now you can see that the moon is at 13 degrees, 17 minutes. And the sun is at 13 degrees, 18 minutes. Well, what that means is that there's a half a minute in between. And if we were to move this forward, by a few seconds at a time, which crazy enough we can do, we would see that that moon will hit the 18-degree point somewhere in here before I get to 60. There it is. So it's still at 8:41. So here we have the full moon. The Earth is in the center with the moon at 13 degrees Sagittarius and 18 minutes. Remember that it's just like a clock. So if it's 18 minutes after the hour, it's a little bit after a quarter after the hour. So the moon is at 13 1/4 degrees. That's the way we work with these numbers. Now, what we look at in a chart is at a new moon or full moon is we try to get a hum. What's going on? And the first thing that I notice, and of course I notice it because I knew it was coming, is that Mercury moving through Taurus, moving rather quickly right now, is moving toward and catching up to the planet Uranus. We haven't talked about Uranus this evening. Uranus is the weird planet. It's the planet that when it was discovered shattered our several thousand-year view of what the local little neighborhood of planets were, because Saturn was the outwardmost planet that we could see. And all of a sudden we discovered a new planet and people said, impossible, amazing, oh my God, it's all. And all of a sudden, instead of having the slowest planetary rhythm be about 30 years, Saturn, all of a sudden it was calculated Uranus had an orbit of 84 years and it was, oh my God, it's a brave new world. Incidentally, Uranus is the planet associated with freedom from Saturn, freedom from the rules. It breaks the rules. Saturn is the planet of individuality that doesn't follow the rules of the social world. And in fact, interestingly enough, when Uranus was discovered, that was the time of both the American and French revolutions, both based upon individual freedom, whether they fully realized that dream or not. It was a huge move away from the previous social orders that have largely, taken over, if not most, at least much of the planet. And so Uranus is like lightning. It's electrical. It works suddenly. It's shock, awe, surprise. In fact, astrologers call Uranus the planet, they call it Uranus the awakener. whereas they call Saturn the tester. You get a little difference of feelings there. Uranus is the light bulb. Got it. Wow. Breakthrough, new thought, idea, radical, revolutionary, sudden. And again, we talked about how Neptune was the higher octave of Venus. Venus, I love you. Neptune, spiritual love. Uranus is the higher octave of Mercury. Mercury is how we think. It's what we say. Uranus is electricity. It's what runs the nervous system that creates and distributes the thoughts. Uranus is, it works like lightning, and lightning is electrical. It's like, boom, lightning strikes for a second in the middle of the darkest stormy night. You can see everything. You can see the rusted out car, down the block in the mountains in the distance or whatever. And then just a second later, it's dark again, but you saw everything and you know it's there. Uranus is like, there's an astrologer, Richard Tarnas, who wrote a book on Uranus called Prometheus, the Awakener, because in a way, it was Prometheus who stole fire from the gods and gave it to the humans. And Uranus is the planet related to invention, breakthrough, future technology, and it's associated with the sign of Aquarius. So right now, today, yesterday, today, tomorrow, we have Mercury lining up with Uranus. And so we might have really brilliant breakthrough thoughts. Things might happen. Something might not work. Technology can mess up. Things are just a little, kind of quirky and electrical in nature. And that's part of the flavor of this full moon in Sagittarius. The moon in Sagittarius is about big ideas, big thoughts, big philosophies, adventure. And yet the sun in Gemini is more about, the difference between Sagittarius and Gemini is Sagittarius is planning and going on an astrology retreat with Rick Levine in Goa for 10 days in December this year. That's a Sagittarius thing. Big thing, plan, go, take a long trip, adventure, be there, somewhere different, then come back. Gemini is more like going to the 7-Eleven for a, pack of whatever, and back. And maybe it's something you do 3 times a week. And so we have this polarity in the sky between these very big ideas, very big thoughts, these big adventures, and yet needing to keep things going on an hour-to-hour basis here. Now, the other thing that's cooking is that over the next couple of days, we can see that Pluto at 0 degrees 6 minutes of Aquarius, if we were to run this back a few days, actually just let's do this a week, and within 2 weeks we can see that Pluto has moved from Aquarius back into Capricorn. It moves very, very slowly, but right now in the sky we have Venus that was part of that grand trine that we looked at. Venus is also moving opposite to Pluto, and that opposition becomes exact on the 5th. This here, I'm going to move this ahead another day, a day at a time, and there you can see now Venus is at 29 degrees of Cancer, and the next day it's in Leo, and it moves exactly opposite to Pluto. And Venus and Pluto together, this is around the 5th, and we might be feeling it already now. Remember, Pluto is the lord of the underworld. Pluto abducted a young Venus. Venus is the goddess of love, attraction, desire. What happens when Venus and Pluto get together in whatever way they do in the sky? Here they're like in a tug of war at opposite ends. Well, Thomas More, do you know that name? He wrote Soulmates and Care of the Soul and the Reenchantment of Nature and Everyday Life. Do you know who I mean? Thomas More, brilliant writer, modern guy. He's a bit older than I am, but he's still alive and writing. Thomas More's first book, way before he got popular, was a book called Dark Eros. Eros being love. And basically the point of the book is that when we talk about love, we usually focus on, on the lovely pleasure of being infatuated and excited and romantic love and all those things that are so yummy and sweet. However, full spectrum love is a spectrum. And anyone who's been in a relationship for a long time, which for some people I get is a week, but for other people it may be decades. For those who have been in relationships, you know that it's not always pleasant. You got to deal with shit. You got to deal with stuff that's darker, stuff that Pluto would like to eliminate. Because remember, Pluto's in charge of deconstruction and elimination. And so what happens when Venus connects up with Pluto, often we find ourselves going into deeper places in whatever communication, emotions, relationship we may be in. Doesn't even need to involve someone on the outside. It involves the polarity that we might hold for ourselves. So we might be stressing over things that are really profound and strong and deep and dark, and maybe have some element of control, or, this whole thing of not being able to change something and just make it light and easy is often something that puts us through our paces, which actually create growth. So we have this cooking, this Venus moving in opposition to Pluto. But coming back to the full moon, we can see that that's already close. And we have these two oppositions. And I'm just going to create something here on the screen. I'm going to get rid of some of the noise. Just bear with me here a quick second. I want to display transiting. Nope, I want to go down here to aspected points, and I want to change this. You'll see why I'm doing this in just a moment. Nope, I didn't do it right. Hold on, aspected points, and edit them. And we want to basically only show the lines between the moon and the sun and Venus. Nope, we got Mercury, get Venus out of there. No, get Mercury out of there, and Pluto. All right, so now when we look at those planets, this creates a bit of a pattern. You can call this sacred geometry, which is really what astrology is built on. And what we have here is we have 4 planets in the sky that are both in opposition to another planet. One is the full moon, always in opposition to the sun. But we also have Venus coming into its opposition to Pluto. The key thing here, though, is that the moon to Pluto is a half of a 90-degree angle. Astrologers look at cycles and we divide them up. And when they come up to a whole number, we say that those planets are connected. The word we use is they're in aspect to another planet. So you divide a circle in half and you get an opposition. Or in thirds, like we did earlier when we looked at the grand trine, you get a trine, a triangle. A square, 90-degree angle, is maximum interference. It's the hardest aspect to move through in any planet because it creates our involvement and our working at solving the energy. They're not bad. In fact, they motivate us to do the coolest stuff in our lives. Things that are creative often are motivated by a 90-degree angle, by a square. A half of a square, 45 degrees, square is 90, or a square and a half, which is 90 plus 45 is 135, are also angles of anxiety, of stress, of conflict that need resolution. And the thing about tomorrow's full moon, which is tomorrow night, just before 9 o'clock, 8:41 p.m. Here in Redmond, is that the full moon at the moment that it's full is a half a square to Pluto, and it's a square and a half. The astrology technical words are semi-square and sesqui, like a sesquicentennial is 150 years, a sesqui square, a square and a half, which means that on the other side, the sun is a half square to Venus and a sesqui-square, square and a half to Pluto. This is a nasty configuration. I'm normally the astrologer who says, there's no such thing as good or bad up there in the sky. And I really do believe that. But there is difficult and easy. And often we choose to take the easy way out of things as humans. It's, we live our lives often on the course of least resistance. It's why an astrologer can look at a chart and make up stories from it, and they're often true because they work with what might be the course of least resistance. But you can look at two identical charts, and one could be a person who lives on the street who is has no food and has problems. And the other person could be a gold medalist in the Olympics, and they have the same charts. One takes the course of least resistance, sometimes because they don't know there's any other course to take, and others basically practice some form of yoga. And when I say that, I don't mean the yoga that you would go to a class. The word yoga actually is Sanskrit for yoke. It's like the yoke of an oxen. And so you have this tremendous power, but it's unbridled. It just does what it does, unless you have some way of disciplining it or regimenting it or controlling it or working with it. And that's really what yoga does as a practice, whether it's a physical yoga or a Raja yoga or a jhana mental yoga. There's all different types of yoga. But here, today and tomorrow, I mean, if you're having shit going on in your life that's complicated or problematic, if you're not, congratulations, good luck. Maybe you should ease off the Xanax or, no, I'm kidding. It's a tough energy, but again, when it rains out there, not everyone is complaining, only the people who have suntan lotion and want to go to the beach. The ducks love rainy weather because there's no humans at the beach. And astrology is like that when we look at these kind of rhythms. There are some people who would look at this configuration and go, oh my God, this is the time when I have a weekend slated for work. I'm going to do all these chores around the house, and they'll get everything done because they're agitated enough to do the things that they haven't done. Are you with me here? So I don't want to spend more time on this. I just wanted to bring this up. It's a very, very powerful few days as we go from June 3rd through the 5th. And you can see how the sun even strengthens. The moon moves out of the way. But the thickness of these lines grows because that aspect gets stronger. And that takes us through June 5th. Even a little bit further, even on through the 6th, 7th, 8th. And there's another whole scenario here. And for those of you who are a bit more geeky, you'll see that Venus is actually coming into a square to the nodal axis, the north and south node of the moon and Jupiter. And that basically plays on through over the next several days, all the way through June 11th. I'm going to go back and add these other lines now. Aspected points, and we'll go back to where we were. Okay, so and all the colored lines in the middle are just basically reminders of what these angles are. The thin ones they are just not as exact. They're not as close. So don't be distracted by all the noise there. So as we move along and get through this full moon, the next bunch of days that is highly significant is right around the 11th. And I'd already mentioned that on the 11th, Pluto, here you can see on the 10th, on the 11th, Pluto retrogrades back into Capricorn. You see that? It goes from 0 degrees, 00 minutes of Aquarius back to 29 degrees and 59 degrees 59 minutes, 29 degrees and 59 minutes of Capricorn. We might not notice it that day, but often the news is sensitive to things like that. And so we want to just keep our eyes, on what's going on globally and what are those things that were unfinished events from the last, years, the last decade or so, that as Pluto goes back into Capricorn, Capricorn, because it's Saturn ruled, there's a bit of having to pay the piper. Saturn and its home sign of Capricorn, rewards hard work and punishes those who don't follow rules. I'll just leave it at that. The other thing, though, that occurs on that date is you can see Mercury down here at the bottom of the chart moves. Remember, Mercury was lined up with Uranus. Now it's moved almost 10 degrees away. And on the 11th, Mercury moves out of Taurus into Gemini, where it's now in the same sign as the sun. Mercury will actually catch up to the sun because it's moving faster than the sun right now by the end of the month, actually on June 30th. So as we get to the 11th, another thing happens, and that is that as Mercury changes signs from Taurus to Aquarius, it makes a harmonious trine, 1/3 of a circle to Pluto. And that, again, is going to be a deep dive in communications. Things come out into the open that were hidden. So I expect this period of time around the 10th, 11th, even on through the 12th and 13th. But I think that this is going to be a very important period of time that will lead up to the 15th, when Mercury reaches 7 degrees of Gemini, and on the one more day here, and it makes a square. I'm going to get rid of the noise of the, hold on one second, aspected planets. And the moon moves so quickly that it doesn't hold any aspects long enough to talk about, except the full moon. So we're just getting rid of the noise of those lines here. But now we can see that Mercury at now almost 8, actually in the 8th degree, this happens early in the morning, it is 90 degrees to Saturn. Mercury square Saturn is like something that we thought isn't true and we got to deal with it. Mercury square Saturn. Saturn, remember, Mercury is how we think. Saturn is the law. What is that thing? Gravity. It's not just a good idea. It's the law. Saturn is the authority. It's the principal in the school. It's the policeman who's in charge of the situation. It's whatever the rule, the judge makes his decree. It's the law. And when Mercury in Gemini, scattered, curious, collecting all kinds of information, saying shit just because it can, it meets up with the law and it can't get away with it. Now, either we double down on what's not true, or we have to change how we think. But usually there's a conflict here in some way. Again, whether this plays out individually or collectively, we want to watch as we move towards the 15th and see what goes on with that, especially because Saturn, which is at 7 degrees and 12 minutes on the 15th, is stationary retrograde on the 17th. So look, it's the following day still at 7 degrees and 12 minutes. And the following day, look, it's still at 7 degrees, 12 minutes. When a planet slows down to turn direct or retrograde, it has more power. It ain't budging. And even though Mercury is moving away from the square, it's already 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. It's already 4 degrees away from the square. By the 18th, Saturn still hasn't moved. So something is going down that week from, let's say, it might come up first around the 11th or 12th, but it's really, the square is exact on the 15th. Saturn turns retrograde on the 17th. And by the 18th, now what happens is the sun reaches a point where it's 90 degrees to Neptune. Neptune is the planet of deception. It's the planet of dreams, illusions, fantasy. It can be sweet. It can be amazingly creative, but prepare to either be misled or to not intentionally mislead someone else. Things here can get muddled a bit. And so it's going to be interesting experiencing that. We have first the hard-ass Saturn to deal with for several days, and then Neptune comes powering in, and this is over a weekend. So I imagine that by Monday, the 19th, that we'll begin to deal with some of the reality of whatever went on over the end of the previous week and over the weekend. And when we come back next month, actually, before I forget, next month I will not be here. Next month I will be teaching out at Omega Institute out north of New York City. I'll be on the road. I will be back the end of July, but the end of June, the first Friday of July, which I think is probably like around the 5th or something like that, 4th, I will not be here. So just actually, as long as I'm here, it will be, there's June, July. Yeah, July 7th. I will not be here. So if you show up, they'll probably have, some YouTube of mine to play, but don't stay home. That's not don't stay home. It's don't stay home. Okay. All right. So moving on. The next important thing that occurs is on June 21st. And we can see here the sun getting closer and closer to the end of Gemini. Well, astrologers have this thing that when the sun moves into a cardinal or season starting sign, which are Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn, these are called the solstices and equinoxes. It's an astrological phenomenon. The first moment of summer is when the sun moves from Gemini. It doesn't move, we're really moving, but you understand what I'm saying. On the 21st, the sun moves from Gemini into Cancer, and this is the first day of the new season. Often things do shift a little bit in our minds, whether we're paying attention to it or not. But the beginning of summer is actually quite intriguing, and I think a bit smoother going after a tough week the week before, because we have all these planets in Leo, Mars, Moon, and Venus, all either making or coming into a trine with Chiron, which is not a true planet, but it's important enough. Chiron mythologically was the original mentor. Chiron was a centaur, half human, half horse. Chiron taught Hercules and Asclepius and other important characters on Mount Olympus. And the god, Chiron was mortally wounded, but because of his amazing healing and teaching abilities, the gods took mercy on Chiron and granted him immortality. But they didn't fix his mortal wound. This is the part of each and every one of us that has hurt, that no amount of therapy, sex, drugs, rock and roll, golf, or whatever it is that soothes your weary soul will ever make go away. We have it forever. It's the thing that makes us human. It's also often the thing that when we see in others, even if we don't verbalize it, we have compassion and we want to help them. And so this is why Chiron is oftentimes called Chiron the wounded healer, because we tend to want to heal others so that they don't have to feel the pain that we can't fix in ourselves. Longer story there, not for tonight, but Mars and the Moon and Venus over the few days ahead will all come into an exact harmonious, smooth flowing energy of trine, a trine to Chiron. This is about healing. This is about teaching. This is about breaking through those things that have held us back, whether it's sometimes our forgiving someone else is way more about us being free from it than it is about giving them anything. They may or may not need our forgiveness. But forgiveness isn't just words, it's truly feeling it. And I think that we're going to have this opportunity here around that first day of summer with all these planets harmonizing or trining Chiron. But here's the real magic. It's Mercury, the culprit again. That's exactly at the halfway point in this 120-degree, 1/3 of a circle, smooth, harmonious, flowing trine. Mercury is 60 degrees to both of them, exactly on both sides. And so Mercury in Gemini becomes the ability to say what we couldn't say before that we now have words for. And so again, this is a tremendous time to pay attention to what hurts and to what hurts those around us. and to reach out and to touch people. And I don't mean physically. Well, although Mars is there, I'm not saying one should not be physical, but it's about the communication aspect here. And so this is a really sweet, I have a friend who calls this kind of aspect a pause in the disaster. It is an interesting beginning of the summer, and that pattern holds really from the 21st, 22nd, even through the 23rd a bit. It gets a little bit more ropey. By the 24th and 25th, we now have Mercury. Let's see, where are we? We're still on the 23rd, 25th. We have Mercury now coming to the end of Gemini, just before it moves into Cancer, like the sun did before. But now Mercury is making that 90-degree angle to Neptune. So again, by the end of the week and over the weekend of June 25th, again, we need to be careful about what we say and about what we think, unless you're writing a poem or a novel or wanting to put flourish on creativity, singing songs. You see, Mercury in Gemini is the communicator, but Neptune doesn't like words. It likes music. It likes dreams. They don't always have to have the words. So we have a bit of a conflict here that might stir things up again around the 25th. And the other thing that happens on the 25th, which I think is a rock and roll day, is that Mars in the sky makes a 90-degree angle, a square to Uranus. Now, remember back on the 4th, we had Mercury lining up with Venus. I said breakthrough thinking, new ideas, whether they're valid or not, doesn't matter. I would say that over the next few days with Mercury coming up to Uranus, June 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, if you have an idea, write it down. Because in 3 days, you won't remember it, because that's the speed at which the Uranian things happen. Now, as Mars, the planet of physicality, is making a harsh, conflictive square with Uranus, we might expect to see on the news maybe some difficult, let's say, conflict. I don't want to put too much negative energy toward this. And look, I get it. There's conflict all the time. I mean, there's things that are happening every day somewhere that's horrific. However, this doesn't have to be horrific. This can actually be a breakthrough. Mars square Uranus is like, this would be like an energy, and I'm not saying this was predominant, and I've never really looked, but Mars square Uranus is like something that would feed the Boston Tea Party that created the American Revolution. Incidentally, Mars and Uranus were incredibly active with one another on January 6th, 2021, just as a point of interest, because it's sudden release of built-up tension that's about expressing one's desire for freedom. Are you with me here? So this, and yet the same day we have this whole, I mean, if there was an aspect for fake news, it would be Mercury square Neptune. But it's not just fake. It's dreams, it's imagination, it's vision. I mean, this would be a day when someone could give a speech that would activate people to do something really important, drive them to anger, not necessarily destruction, but to go out and do something like save the planet. Because it's Mars, Uranus, there's like this physical energy, but it's Mercury to Neptune. It doesn't have to be about deceit. It can be about higher creative vision, but there's conflict involved. And I think we will see that on this Sunday that may fall over into Monday, the 26th. Mercury then moves into Cancer. We all become a little bit quieter. Good news, bad news, is maybe things aren't quite as exciting or as interesting, and maybe people are easier to get along with. But the problem with the Sun and Mercury both being in Cancer is it's easier to swallow a bad feeling and do nothing about it, which then can express somatically in our body. I mean, this is about passive aggression. Are you angry? No. I'm going to kill that motherfucker, because we have the anger, but we don't necessarily express it. And then as we move towards the last days of the month, Venus now moves into that exact position where Mars was, making that exact trine to Chiron. And I have to say, toward the whole latter part of the month, we have this energy of Venus and Mars coming closer together in Leo. And next month, July, we have Venus actually turning retrograde in Leo. It stays in Leo forever, for months. But as these two planets are coming closer together, they're still bringing in that harmonious energy to Chiron, which gives us opportunity to heal the wounds that are left over from the past. Also, as we get to the end of the month, we have first the Sun and then Mercury as they move closer and closer together. And in fact, on the last day of the month, you'll see if I move this one day ahead, Mercury will now be on the other side of the Sun because Mercury is moving faster than the Sun. On the last day of the month and the couple days before that, both the Sun and Mercury form a harmonizing trine with Saturn, suggesting that while Neptune turns retrograde, as I said, although it's not moved for a week or so here, that we get some stability. We may actually feel like our feet are on the end of the ground. On the end of the ground. That sounded ominous. Don't take another step. Now, we might feel like our feet are actually on the ground by the end of the month, and that we can really do some breakthrough work in healing. But with trines, the energy flows. And you know, that's the saying from the Course in Miracles, I think, energy goes, energy goes where attention flows. No, the other way around. Energy flows where attention goes. And so when you get a trine, often we can become lazy. And I would just put a little bug in all of your minds that as we get closer to the end of the month, those things which we kind of can let slide and not deal with, don't let slide. Because this is a really smooth time to bring up some of those difficult things, especially if you want real enduring sustenance to come out of it. Why enduring and sustenance? Is because that's Saturn's job. Saturn makes things, Saturn stabilizes things. Saturn is about structure. It's about stamina. It's about persistence. And so as we get to the end of the month, I think we have a very different flavor than we do in the second and third weeks of the month. So that takes us through to the end of the month. And before we're going to take a short break, and we'll come back and we'll look at a couple of charts for those of you who are either addicted or have nothing better to do. I'm going to put these on the table over here, and I'm going to put this hat. If you have never had your chart done at a gathering like this that I've done, and you want to, your birth data will be exposed. I won't use your last name, but put your full name and your email address. I will not send you shit, nor will I pass it along to anyone else. But at some point in time, you may get an email from me saying, if you want to be on my mailing list, click here. And if not, you won't ever hear from me again. But sometimes I need to get a hold of people for whatever reason. So, but your name, full name, email address, and your birth month, day, year, and the time of day. I need the time of day, and you need to circle AM or PM. It makes a difference. And where were you born? In the United States, city, state works fine. Anywhere else, city, country works fine. And you can just put them in this cap. I'll leave it right there. I will draw 3 names. We'll look at 3 charts briefly for the group. And you'll kind of get a sense of how astrology works and how it does. In the meantime, in the break, get what you need to get from the counter. They will close at some point in time during our little talk. Also, I do this for free, community service. But if you want to leave a few dollars, $5, $10, $20, whatever, you can do that at the register. It just goes into the Soul Food Fund for hosting events, you know, like this. It's not for me, it's for them, but they're awesome. In the same line as that, if you have someone's birthday or something coming up, don't spend your money on Amazon. I mean, well, you can, obviously, but there's a lot of cool stuff here. Get that gift that you were going to get. In other words, we can vote economically, spend a little money here, share the love. And thank you to the baristas. You guys are awesome. And we appreciate you. And with that, we'll reconvene in about 10 minutes. Any questions on anything that I did so far, by the way? And thank you to everyone out there in internet land who is here, wherever here is. Any questions, anything, anyone? Yeah, please. No, you're just waving. Yeah.
How do you think about, I'm trying to keep track of the Venus-Pluto aspects as they keep happening. How do you think about the opposition separate from like the square or the conjunction?
Got it. What the question for those of you out on YouTube is how do I think about the various aspects of Venus and Pluto in specific reference to the opposition that's occurring now? I think you meant, what do you think? Because if I told you how I thought, I would think, well, let's see. First, I think of this, and then I remember that. Oh, and this has something, but I wouldn't be telling you what I was thinking. It's the what is it? It's the proofreader in me that needs sometimes to do that. So, what do I think about Pluto? So the thing about Pluto let me do this again. The thing about Venus and Pluto is that those two planetary energies are always going to be involved in whatever the aspect is. So we have Pluto, the Lord of the underworld, the transformational power of death and rebirth. Death does not come without rebirth, but often if it can feel painful. If a caterpillar had an ego like we do, there's no way it would ever get into the cocoon to die, but it doesn't, and so it trusts in that process. So Pluto doesn't change. Pluto, is always about that process of deconstruction, reconstruction. It's about intense volcanic change that can't be stopped once it's started. And Venus is always about what it is that we're attracted to or repulsed by, because remember, that's that full spectrum thing. It's the nature of what we consider to be beautiful is Venus. And so whenever those two planets connect up in whatever aspect they do, there's always a sense of those energies involved. When they're connecting up by conjunction, those two energies are somehow in the same place. When two things are in the same place, you have no perspective. You can't see yourself. Why? Because you're in the same place as your eyes. That's the nature of a conjunction. But there is a focus and a density that makes it so that when Pluto and Venus are conjoined, that we are that deep dive. We are that volcanic intensity. We are that metamorphosis. An opposition is maximum perspective because we're on opposite sides of a coin or on opposite ends of a tug of war. Whenever there's an opposition in astrology, whether it's a full moon or a Venus opposed Pluto or any two planets opposed, it's almost like we have two things pulling us in different directions so much that we can't see them both. And often what happens is, oh, I like Venus better than Pluto. Or if you're a real badass, it's, Venus is for wimps. I like Pluto better than Venus. But in whatever you do at that moment, when you look at one, the other is invisible. And invisible things that aren't expressed, we tend to project. And so when we have oppositions, almost always, nothing is always in astrology, but when we have an opposition like Venus opposed Pluto, or even a full moon, the moon opposed the sun, it almost always involves relationship. Now, relationship can be your spouse or your friend or your employer or your kid or your parent or a favorite book or your computer or a rock that you just picked up. But it's something that's inside outside. In fact, it can be two natures within yourself even, but normally it flips out. And so the opposition often will mean that you encounter something, someone out there that is acting either as a Pluto or a Venus that is stimulating your Pluto or Venus, that engages you in that deep dive, that dance, that struggle, the struggle between wanting everything to be beautiful and finding yourself lost in a deep cave with someone who you don't like or whatever. I mean, it doesn't have to be that. And in fact, it doesn't have to be negative at all. It can be the most profound. We would call this shadow work, a Jungian term. It can be the most profound work that we do in a relationship is doing that. Now, with a square, a 90-degree angle, there's the conflict, but it's neither outer nor inner. It's just a conflict. It's dynamic, and we have to work to resolve it because we can't deal with both of them at once. Now, with a trine, it's easy. In my natal birth chart, I have Venus trine Pluto. And although there are days when I hate it, there are times when I feel very privileged that I get to experience such profound depth that doesn't always feel like it's mine, but there's an attraction and an ease to going to those plutonic places. And the same would be true with a sextile. And there are many other aspects, but that kind of answers the question enough. So we just added 7 minutes to your evening. Be careful if you have another question. By the way, I mentioned this thing in Goa, India, that I'm doing, a retreat. It's about half filled up. It's the first week. It's December 6th through the 16th. I'll put some cards on that table. Feel free to take one. It has a lot more information about that. It's an amazing place. I've taught there before. Goa is on the Arabian Sea. We call it India Light. It's an easy part of India to navigate around and through. And if anyone's interested, talk to me. I'll be glad to tell you more. And I'll also leave business cards there. And these will reconvene in about 10 minutes. And thank you all for coming out on such a gorgeous night, and especially a night with Venus trine Neptune. Okay. And we'll reconvene in about 10 minutes. And don't feel badly or need to apologize if you go home.
All right, people, we're about to get back here. This is Sparkles of Gold. And I'm about to hook up the mic towards him with him. Thanks for being patient. We're running on Gemini time, which is late. You're live.
Okay, if there's anyone left on YouTube, we are back. Sorry you couldn't join our little social here. But we have 3 charts. All right, hello. This separates, not to be sexist, but this separates the men from the mice. Or maybe that's the, no, never mind. I was going to say something about Disneyland and DeSantis, but I'm not going there.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So we have 3 charts and we are going to move through these 3 charts. And the deal is that if I've picked your chart, you need to self-identify, wave your arms around in the air or something, and be honest if we engage on any level, because it's not about you, you're just being used. It's about all of us that are learning from you. So first chart is Andrew. Andrew, born November 13th, 1993. I immediately know anyone know what was going on astrologically, like 93? Yeah, it was a once every other century conjunction of Uranus and Neptune that was kind of fed by Saturn moving through that starting in 88, 89, and a very powerful period of change in its own right. All right, so let's get this data entered. We have Andrew, and I always put SF for your last names because I'll know that meant that you were from SoulFood. So, how I confuse myself. And we have November 13th, 1993. November 13th, 93 at 12:03 p.m. 12:03 p.m. and in Semina Monica. Okay, so I have to tell you a quick Santa Monica story because I lived there for several years. Actually, I lived in Mar Vista, just on the other side of the airport from Santa Monica. Hold on, and that's a CA. But the hardest thing about leaving Santa Monica for me was never again being able to say once a year to everyone I knew, Happy Hanukkah from Santa Monica. And there's nothing much that rhymes with Redmond. About the best I could ever get was Christmas bells rattle from east of Seattle. It was my best shot. And for those of you who know me, you know that if I didn't have to make a living doing astrology, I would just read and write poetry. It's my Venus-Neptune opposition. Speaking of Venus-Neptune trines, which we were earlier. Okay, so this is all good and all good. And Andrew, what's your dance with astrology? What's your interest or relationship or whatever?
I feel like I'm pretty spiritual. I don't really get too much into the astrology piece of it. I do love that for that more.
So for those of you on the internet, Daniel basically said that he's been studying astrology his whole life. He's a professional. I'm making that up. He didn't say anything like that. He said that astrology is part of a larger spiritual intrigue, let's say, or pursuit. Do you know your chart at all? A little bit, or? All right, so let's see what we got. We have Aquarius rising. Is that you? So, oh, and let's get the aspects to the moon back on, which I took out before because they were just making noise for us. Let's go edit and add back in. Whoops, that's not what we want. We want, hold on a second. We want to go aspected points and we want to add back in the moon. Now we're good to go. All right. So the first thing that I notice should be the first thing that anyone notices. I have a way of teaching astrology with my apprentices and online teaching, and it doesn't really matter where you come to chart interpretation from. Everyone has different techniques and different procedures, and I'm a bit of a technique agnostic, meaning I don't know. However, I'm a process fanatic. And I think that once we learn just the planet signs and houses and aspects, which are really the fundamental building blocks of astrology, which may seem like a lot if you don't know them. But once we learn them, then it becomes, as we look at charts, I teach all of my students to look at a chart and without even thinking, look at the chart and what jumps out at you. And when I teach this online, we typically have a group of 5 or 10 or 20 people in a chat, in a Zoom room. And it's like, no delineation. Don't tell me what you think of this person or don't even describe the aspect. Look at the chart. What do you see? Boom, 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 boom. And we go around the room that way. In this, it's hard to miss 6 planets in Scorpio and 7 or 8 planets counting the North Node that are clustered together within 33 degrees, 30 degrees of Scorpio and another 3 degrees of Sagittarius. And in fact, all the planets, with the exception of Saturn, are above the horizon. And so that's, before I even looked at anything else in a chart, I would start there. And what that would suggest to me, because again, we talked about earlier how the east-west is backwards. The rising sign is where the sun rises in the east, and that's 10 degrees of Aquarius. And that's backwards from a map that we would look at. But so is the north and south, because if I'm looking at the sky and I see the sun from the northern hemisphere, the sun is always to the south. Therefore, when I look at a chart, everything above the horizon is to the south, not to the north. So the first thing I notice is that pretty much everything, with the exception of Saturn, is in the southern hemisphere above the horizon. And you can think of the division of the horizon kind of like day and night. In the daytime, you can see things. In the nighttime, you can't. So one might assume, now this is tempered, modified very strongly by the fact that there are 6 planets in what may be the most hidden, or maybe the second most hidden sign in the zodiac, Scorpio. I think it's the other contender would be Cancer. Cancer, when it hides, you don't know it's hiding. Scorpio, when it hides, you know it's hiding, because chances are they're going to use whatever they're not saying against you. I'm kidding. But in looking at a chart and just seeing all the planets above the horizon, one might assume that Andrew lives his life in a goldfish bowl. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone knows everything about you, but it means that there are more things that people know than what they don't. You can walk around a goldfish bowl and kind of see all sides of it. By the same token, if Andrew was born, let's say 12 hours earlier or later, and all these planets were beneath the horizon, we would meet Andrew, but we wouldn't have a damn clue as to who he was or what he was about or what he did or who he did or who he didn't do and why he didn't, whatever. We wouldn't know. But with you, I would imagine that people know, but then again, there's that Scorpio energy of holding energy in, unless it's either earned or unless there's trust, or it's almost like that old military thing, need to know basis. There's an astrology axiom among astrologers that when you go into the room and go, hey, 4 people, what's your sign? Oh, I'm a Gemini. I'm, a Taurus. I'm not telling. Oh, you're a Scorpio. Who's next? Because the person who's not telling is typically the Scorpio. The Cancer, incidentally, might say, I'm a Cancer, but they'll tell. I mean, they're not going to use it structurally as a holding of power. I mean, there are other things here that would confuse this. That makes this a little bit less, likely one way or another. One is that all of these planets in Scorpio are in the 9th house. They're close to the top of the chart. They may be more outgoing than a typical typical Scorpio. Another thing is that Jupiter is in the mix, and Jupiter is often a sign of it where the person is outgoing, especially because the 9th house has to do with Saturn, which is related to Jupiter. And so there's definitely some outgoing energy here. But the thing that I noticed as I looked at this cluster right away is that you, Andrew, were born approximately 2 hours prior to the new moon. Now, how do I know that looking at a chart? What I know is that the moon moves about 1 degree every hour. The moon moves faster than the sun. The moon is at 20 and about 20 and a half degrees, because half past an hour is 30 minutes. Half past a degree is 30 minutes. And so I know that Andrew's moon was about 20 and a half degrees of Scorpio. His sun is at 20 and a half degrees of Scorpio. So the moon is 1 degree, 1/360th of a circle, 1 degree away from the sun. 1 degree, 2 hours. There was probably a full moon at about 2 o'clock on the day that you were born. Now, why is this important? Because technically, Andrew is not born at a new moon. He's born prior to the new moon. The new moon is the moment of the new moon and the first 45 degrees after that. That's considered to be a new moon. You are born at the balsamic or dark moon. And so that moon is getting closer and closer to the light of the sun. And there's this kind of element of hiddenness. We're back to the Scorpio hiding energy. If you were born, let's say 3 hours later at the, after the new moon, you might be a lot more energetically outgoing. But before the new moon, there's this whole thing about the fear of an end, the fear of the next cycle. And I'm not saying that this is something you think about hourly, daily, weekly, but there's something, the person born before the new moon can be a fanatic about something, about anything, because there's this focus on energy to kind of, what's the word I'm looking for, to relax, to alleviate that fear of the total darkening of the moon. Where do you fall in all this? Well, I mean, based upon what I said, do you relate to either sides of those equations? They're very different energies. I mean, on one hand, it's like everyone sees, but on the other hand, I don't think anyone knows. They think they see.
I think that's pretty apt. I would say I'm not as extroverted, but there's something about endings, closure.
Yeah, and this is not about extroversion, introversion. I mean, one can be quite introverted and yet still everyone knows their shit because they don't hide it. It's a different energy than the introversion, extroversion, but it's a whole lot of Scorpio energy, and people don't understand Scorpio. I mean, it gets the signs that get the bad raps in traditional, not traditional, in modern popular astrology tend to be the feminine signs, and tend to be, I say feminine, not gender feminine, energetically yin rather than yang, polarity plus minus, starting with Aries it just goes around the 12 signs, plus minus, or male, female, again, not gender, or yang, yin. And the yin signs, as you get toward the end of the zodiac, are Pisces, Capricorn, and Scorpio. But Scorpio and Pisces tend to be pretty misunderstood, as does Virgo, another feminine energy sign. And Scorpio in particular, because it's so emotionally intense. There is a sense of emotional volatility, which is why, in order to survive, they learn to hold stuff in closer. I mean, Cancer doesn't express itself emotionally because it's afraid it will be rejected. Scorpio holds itself in emotionally because it's not afraid it'll be rejected. It's afraid that it'll be so totally misunderstood that it'll be potentially harmed. I would imagine with someone with that much Scorpio in their chart, that early on in life, you learned that you just don't talk about everything you feel to everyone because they seem to do this. I didn't realize it was so late, Andrew. I got to go. because most people cannot handle the emotional intensity of Scorpio or Pluto, because Pluto, being the modern planet associated with Scorpio energy, traditionally it's Mars. And Mars and Pluto both have that kind of feisty, fiery kind of combativeness. But Mars, if it doesn't win on the first punch, because Mars is about impulse, Pluto will always win. Just like I've said for years, being an Aries, having been in relationship with a few Scorpio people, like my father and my daughter, and and a few people who I've been very close with over the years. That when Aries is fighting Scorpio, if Aries doesn't win on the first blow, Scorpio will always win, because it has that depth and intensity, whereas Aries blows it all off the top. And so there's always more going on in Scorpio than is able to come to the surface, because Scorpio learns. It's like a volcano always having its eruption. It just doesn't work. You have to hold that stuff in. Now, the intriguing thing to me about all that Scorpio energy, in particularly your sun, moon, and Pluto is so close to your sun. And it's also intriguing that the other ruling planet or planet associated with Scorpio, Mars, is often to Sagittarius, which gives you some hope. And I mean that in more ways than one. And I think it's important that all these planets are in the 9th house related to Sagittarius, that Jupiter is there in the cluster, and that both your North Node, which is the place where the moon's orbit around the Earth intersects with the Earth's orbit around the sun, that both the Mars and the North Node, which are closely aligned, which often indicate some connection with reincarnation, whether it's from the past or intended reincarnations in the future. There's something here about, again, the hope, the future, the excitement, the adventure of that Sagittarius energy that becomes so important. And the fact that Saturn in Aquarius, your rising sign, which is how you appear to others, it's the interface that the inside has with the outside, is 90 degrees or square the Scorpio planets, in particular the sun and moon and Pluto. That's a lot of square. That is dynamic, powerful conflict. What's the conflict? I would say that the conflict is between the emotionality and emotional intensity of the Scorpio and the cool, cold scientist and the rationality of the Aquarius. How did I do? I see you grinning.
Keep going.
Your Honor, let the records reflect that the witness, no, I'm kidding. But does that make sense to you, seriously? Yeah. And it's very powerful. It's very dynamic. But the thing about squares is that they're not bad. They just require our attention, because if we're not paying attention to them, what happens is that one or other of the 2 points on the square just take over. So like if you're not paying attention, you can become a jerk because you have no, emotional presence, or it's like people can think you don't care, or people can think you're cold. I'm not saying they do, but I'm saying that when that Saturn comes over, it's, look, I've studied this. I know I'm the authority. Don't mess with me. The flip side is that if Saturn is on vacation and you just go to the Scorpio place, you're in some place where it's so intense that you're not for the meek or mild-mannered, because the energy is too much. And I think that in a positive way, that Saturn can be used to moderate the intensity. With that Saturn square, all that Scorpio energy, and Pluto is like the Pluto in Scorpio, and all that Scorpio energy is like the movie China Syndrome. It's nuclear meltdown. And of course, you can't stop a nuclear process once it's begun. Anyone ever remember that old Disney thing with the mouse traps in the room, all set with ping pong balls in them? And they throw one ping pong ball in, and the 2 makes 4, makes 8, makes 6, and all of a sudden the entire room is ping pong ball exploding. That's the way the nuclear level energy of eruption works in the Scorpio realm. And I imagine anyone who's known you long enough has probably experienced something on that level from you, which is probably less fun for you than it is for them. But unless it's associated with passion that's being melted, then it's a different story. All right. The other side of that, though, is that, so on one hand, we have this potential nuclear meltdown. And on the other hand, we have Saturn, which is about containment. Saturn, Pluto, or Aquarius, Scorpio, however you want to look at it, Saturn and Pluto, in some ways, is like controlled fission, which is how you can take 1 ounce of plutonium and have it power a ship for a year, because it doesn't just blow its top. Let's just put it that way. It doesn't explode. It doesn't lose control. And by maintaining control, it maintains this incredible longevity, persistence, endurance, and so on. And so I imagine also that with Aquarius rising, you might have a lot of friends, or you might have friends that are really good friends, but there's a strong difference between a friend and an intimate relationship, because that's the square between the easygoing social interaction based on equality of that Aquarius rising and all that Scorpio energy. Now, having said that, we need to pay attention to the Mars in Sagittarius, which is looking at the adventure, which is whether, it's life is an adventure, and there's always somewhere to go that's way out there, way down the road, that is, again, the hope for the future. And then the proverbial elephant in the room is that every other century, Uranus, which takes 84 years to go around once, goes around once, and by then Neptune's almost halfway around on the other side. So it takes Uranus 2 times to catch up to because Uranus is 84 years and Neptune is 160. So in a way, every second Uranus cycle catches up to Neptune, and that happened in 1993. So we can see here that Andrew has Neptune 5 minutes away from 19 degrees, 55 minutes, five minutes to the hour, you can think. And Uranus is 9 minutes after. So that's less than 1/4 of a degree, those two lined up, which is a statement of kind of the deep spirituality that you talked about with Neptune in the sign of the foundations, reality, Capricorn. But with Uranus there's a bit of iconoclasm of not necessarily buying the authoritative party line. And now we go back to the Saturn square that you have And I would imagine that early on in your life, there may have been some, how to say this publicly in a way that there may have been some problems with authority or authority figures, whether it was parental or school or religion or learning, because there's a part of you that knows what you feel and knows what's going on the inside, and that it doesn't match up to the way the rules are being enforced. Can you relate to that at all? Is that all we're going to get out of you?
If you have a more direct question.
No, I don't. No, but what we're seeing is the willingness to share of all the planets above the horizon and 6 planets in Scorpio. You know, you willing to share? Sure. Ask me a question and I will specifically answer it. Where were you the night on, yeah, no. Where were you on the night of the 14th? No, kidding. So yeah, what do you do for work, living, school, what? Where?
I teach and I'm in administration for a school.
And what do you teach?
Latin, anatomy, and physiology.
Connect those dots for me. Just that's what you had to teach.
Yeah, so I fell into Latin, but I was kind of doing that for a while before I kind of went into some sociology. And those two, Latin and anatomy and physiology, are kind of intertwined.
Okay, so the idea of being a kid and wanting to be a doctor, that comes from the Aquarius, Saturn and Aquarius, that and the Scorpio part of, you know, the I don't want to say not being afraid of, but being curious and wanting to figure out what's hidden in the body and how do you relate to that stuff. The connection with death. I mean, Scorpio is certainly connected with death in a Plutonic way. It doesn't mean that every Scorpio will die, but every Scorpio will die. That's my prediction. You're a Scorpio, you're going to die. Okay. Hopefully not today or this year or next decade or for many decades.
Again and again.
William Blake, who was not a Scorpio, he was a Sagittarius, I think, wanted for his epitaph on his gravestone, he wanted William Blake, born 1757, died many times since. It's laughable, but it's a very important Scorpio Plutonic thing, because Scorpio is attracted and intrigued by the process of what goes on. I want to say after death and before birth, but I really mean in all those realms that are not obvious. And the attraction to medicine and even to Saturn and Aquarius, which is very Latin oriented because it has to do with Saturn, the fundamentals in Aquarius for all humanity, you know, at least anyone in the Western world, whether they know it or not. And so it's a dynamic expression, and I find it intriguing that you're still teaching, you know, stuff about the body and Latin, even though you're doing administrative work. The only other thing that I would want to mention here is that over the past few years, if we look at where the planets are now in the sky today, you know, those of us who do astrology on a regular basis, I can't always tell you where Mercury or Venus are, because if I don't look or think about it, I wrote a daily for over 20 years and I always knew, but I know where the outer planets are and I kind of know where they were because you see enough of them. And I know that, for example, right now, Pluto is at 0 degrees of Aquarius, backing into Capricorn, and it's touching Aquarius, probably touched some resonance notes in you that will probably take 7 years until that Pluto gets to your ascendant. And I just did this by just dirty, quick mathematics, knowing that Pluto is going to take about 20 years to go through the sign. 10 degrees of Aquarius is about 1/3 of the way through. And therefore 7 times 3 is 21. So in about 7 years or so, Pluto is going to be lining up with your ascendant, which is going to be hugely transformative. Now, we can look at the nature of what some of those transformations might be by looking at when other planets happen to go across that ascendant point, planets that move much faster. And in particular, we'd be looking at Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, which have all gone over your ascendant. And very quickly, we can just use a very cool tool in this program that allows us to look. We are looking at your chart again in the middle. And there's no lines here, but you can recognize the planets are all in the right places. The planets in the outer chart are where they are now. Now, most people see two charts. They see a chart of Andrew's birth moment and then a chart of this moment. An astrologer who's trained, however, doesn't see two charts. They see a waveform from one chart to another. Let me show you what I mean. So, for example, we can see that Pluto was here when Andrew was born, and in Andrew's life, Pluto moved to here. That's Pluto's wave. And so somewhere early in his childhood, Pluto came over that Mars, which might have been rather disruptive as to when that was. And in fact, we could run this sucker back really, really quickly and see that Pluto moved into Sagittarius roughly in 97, give or take a year. I'm not zoning in on this exact, but so we would guess that around age 5, 6, there may have been some major structural changes on the home front or something that you went through. Is there anything that comes to mind from then? Or
Two things.
and speak up if you would.
Yeah, my grandma, she passed, and then my parents officially divorced.
Got it. So thank you for sharing that. And for those online, Andrew said that his grandmother passed away and that there was a domestic change, divorce on the home front. These are plutonic kinds of things. They're one-way streets. They're even when we don't fully understand it at age 5 or 6, it's a metamorphosis of sorts, of direct impact. But now we follow, and we also see that because Uranus is moving faster than Neptune, twice as fast, we can see that by age 6, 7, Uranus is already in Aquarius from Capricorn, getting close to Andrew's ascendant. And by the next year, so we're talking now extending this another year, that Uranus goes over the ascendant. The ascendant is our interface with the outer world, which would lead one to believe that when a planet goes over the ascendant, often there's a change of living condition. You already kind of shared that. And often there's even a move, but it's like electric, radical things happen. It feels sudden. And yet in that, because it's Uranus, even at 5 or 6 years of age, you have more freedom than you had before on some level. Both parents aren't paying attention. Energy is just a different energy, but it's electrical. Now, then as we follow that, as we follow that around, we then look at Neptune, and Neptune reaches that same point roughly at 2002-ish, but we're going to say age 8, 9 years old. Is that right? 9, yeah, like in that period of time, like 9 years or so. Now, Neptune's influence is more subtle. It can be overwhelming, but it can be confusing. There's kind of like a disassociation. Sometimes with Neptune transits, we feel like we're living in a dream world, but sometimes things happen that what's happening is not what we think is happening. And I wouldn't be surprised if the things that were going on then aren't quite as memorable or memorable from a different place, but nothing strikes you, which is fine. But now I want to focus on Saturn for a moment, because Saturn takes 30 years, 29 and a half years to go around. And we're just watching Saturn as it comes all the way around. And starting in 2013, Saturn moves into Scorpio, and through 2013 and 2014, even into the beginning of 2015, Saturn in the sky is lining up with all those planets in Scorpio and Sagittarius, so that this is a time when one would imagine that there's a lot of pressure on you, that there's things going on that are not easy to assimilate, whether it's hard work or hard studies or difficulty in getting along with others or someone abandoning you or you leaving someone else or any of those kinds of things. But Saturn is about, it's testing you. And it goes back to the Nietzsche line of that which doesn't kill me makes me stronger. Often while we're going through a transit of Saturn, and I imagine for you, this would have probably peaked in the 2014 period of time. So, around age 2021-ish. That often when Saturn is lining up with our sun and our moon, we feel like we're like a snake that's outgrown its skin. It's like we're afraid to breathe or move because everything will rip or tear. But we're not at home when we're at home. And yet this is often difficult to go through. And then when you look back at it, you go, wow, I'm really glad that happened, even though while you're in it, it sucked. Anything to share?
Lots of things were going on in college, super depressed, did start therapy, changed my major, huge kind of just shift in perspective.
Okay, that's enough. I mean, I know there's more, but that's totally cool, Scorpio. But following this along now, we're going to bring that Saturn all the way down until it reaches the ascendant, which it did. And let's zone in a little bit more here. That Saturn actually crossed your ascendant, and we can actually watch as Jupiter first. We're looking at the beginning of 2021. So this is mid-COVID, quarantine, whatever. But we're looking at late 2020 into 2021. And Saturn by April actually crosses over your ascendant. And then it retrogrades back over it by September, and then goes over it finally by January of 2022. And so again, we're looking for structural changes, a move, something physical, something in the outer world that relates to how you relate to the outer world. And in your chart, this in some ways is all preparation for your Saturn return, which is when Saturn completes that cycle, catches up to where it was when you were born, which would have been more like 2020, later in 2022. Let's see, first, somehow we lost the year here. Hold on. Oh, Saturn was really moving then. So the first switch over that, this really began by 2020, by the summer of 2022, Saturn is returning to where it was when you were born. And that lasts all the way through probably this, January, February of this year. By March, Saturn leaves or left Aquarius and moved into Aries. And so now after the past couple of years of changes, of probably a lot of structural change and even some difficult stuff, I don't want to say you're cruising, but you're cruising. You're home, you've done the work, you've grown up, and now Saturn returned. And now that Saturn in the sky, as it's moving through Pisces, water is now trining all of your Scorpio water stuff. And so these are a couple of years where things will probably flow a whole lot easier than they were back a couple of years ago. Does that make sense? Want to share something with us without me asking a question? Come on, you can do it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think when you're talking about that shift and that change, it was kind of me going back to stuff and kind of discovering what I wanted to do with my life and where I wanted.
And was there a physical move in there?
No.
Okay. Doesn't always happen. I had when Saturn went over my ascendant, I did not move physically either, but I certainly moved metaphysically. The day-to-day routines of my life changed, which is often what happens in this period of time. So thank you. Got another couple of charts to look at really quickly. Actually, really quickly. Yeah, we're going to hit these really, really quickly. Just so that we can say we did this. Debbie.
Right here.
Yay, Debbie. All right. And And you are 9/5/52, 9/5/52 at 1:13 a.m., 1:13 a.m. And that's going to be in Siwa. Yeah, it's the tree not far from the, no, the fruit not far from the tree. All right. What's that?
Same birthday, September 5th.
Different year,
Different year.
I'm guessing.
Decades. Yeah.
All right, so first thing I see when I look at your chart, first of all, you can see the difference, how many planets are here on the bottom of the chart, although the moon and Jupiter are up there on the top, but this is a lot more even of a distribution, even though Debbie has more stuff that's below the horizon, which would have me believe that the goldfish bowl that she lives in has shades. Shades. Can't see it. And I noticed though that that the sun is in Virgo and that the moon is in Pisces. Those are signs that are opposite, but it's the day after the full moon. How do I know that? Because the full moon would be at 12 degrees of Pisces. And so the moon moves about 12 degrees a day. So it was the day after the full moon. But the thing that I do see is this little cluster of planets in Libra, Venus and Saturn and Neptune, all in Libra, which would be the creative, artistic, the part that is driven towards art. Doesn't have to be painting. A therapist is an artist. You know, it's someone who basically has a way of perceiving and reflecting what's out there. That Libran energy with Saturn and Venus and Neptune there could certainly be someone who is a counselor or a diplomat of some sort, or a go-between, or someone who is creative on some level. Now, the sun in Virgo, though, is normally someone who's quite careful as they move through life. I mean, there's a lot of words that one can use for Virgo. I mean, it's a mercurial sign, so it's often related to thoughts and intelligence, but it's more focused and practical. And there is a Mercury lined up with Pluto, lined up with the node. Now here we have a clue, because that we were talking about the Mercury being the psychopomp and going into the unconscious. And so there's something about Debbie who uses her language to go deep on one level or another. And it's also connected with the South Node, which is often related to the past. And so this may be something from earlier in her life, or something that she's an adept, something that she's already mastered, or something even from a past life, or something a little bit more harder to put your finger on. But this is a part of her chart that is actually a bit stressed. It's the square to Jupiter and the square and a half to Chiron. And with Cancer rising, Cancer, remember, is emotional, it's feeling, it's caring. I often think of the Cancer rising as the person, it's the hard outer shell of the crab. Why? Because a crab doesn't have a backbone. We think as a vertebrate, well, that's terrible. Well, no, it's just a different way of living. It makes one structure built upon the structures on the outside. And so this, on some level, with the moon so high in the chart, in compassionate, even intuitive Pisces, way up at the top of the chart, that's often associated with career. Whether or not Debbie has done this for a living or not, I have her in my mind pegged as a depth psychologist. Now, that doesn't mean that that's what she does. But I would imagine as she's moved through life that there are things in that realm that become part of how she interacts with others. You want to say something about that?
Yeah, I've been a real estate broker for 35 years, but a lot of it is psychology. It's people, it's connections, it's that whole thing, and everything you described.
So the real estate has many different factions to it. But one of the things is that Cancer is the sign that is connected with home. So this would suggest home residential rather than commercial. I don't know what I mean. And there are the sun at the very, very bottom of the chart. Like the top of the chart is our career. The bottom of the chart has to do with our home. It has to do with our points of origin. And this house, the fourth house related to Cancer, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, with Saturn, the work planet, Venus, the planet of money and aesthetics, and Neptune, the planet of vision, all in that house related to homes, with Cancer rising, Uranus, the planet of, the individual freedom, also in Uranus, in Cancer, it's rising. There's something here about how real estate has offered you that freedom. And yet, like you said, there's something psychological. I think it's deeper than that. I think the people that you have as clients, in some ways, they let you into their lives in ways that might be deeper than some other real estate agents, people. One last thing here that is incredibly significant, and that is that the closest aspect in the chart has to do with this able to go deep. Now, remember, Pluto is also, it's not about money, it's about immense wealth, because it's under the ground. A plutocracy is a government by the wealthiest. Under the ground is where diamonds, gold, silver, copper. I mean, traditionally, it's not about the money that you trade up here. It's about those things that develop real money. We're back to real estate here for a second, especially because that is square to Jupiter in Taurus. And Jupiter is where opportunity comes from. And Taurus, again, is about money. It's the Venus sign. And so but the sun in Virgo, I would also imagine that when Debbie was in her heyday of being really productive, that it was hard. I don't want to say it was hard to get her as your agent, but she was busy and she got to choose. There was something about that Virgo. You weren't willing to take people on as clients unless there was some connection or something that you got from them with all that other depth stuff.
Very true.
Very true.
Very true.
That's probably enough here. I would say that Saturn, if we were to look at the big scale of things, Saturn is now in Pisces, coming up to the top of the chart. And that's always a time of fruition. And when Saturn is at the bottom of the chart, it's the time when we choose our long-term goals. And if we were to look at this as we did in the same tool as we did with Andrews, and we just run this back a whole bunch of years, we're just running this backward. And what we want to do is we want to get, so because when we get into our 40s, 50s, and 60s, we have the opportunity of having Saturn gone around once 30, around twice 60. And so we can look at Debbie's chart and see that Saturn reached the top of her chart for the first time in the mid 60s. And so regardless of, her age, just being a late teen, 13, 14, there was something here about a culmination. It's almost like the first part of her life, there was just things happening, do this, do that. Now you go here, now you go to this school. But somewhere around the age of 13, Saturn reaches the top of the chart. And for the next 14 years, Saturn is moving downward until we get roughly to 1980. And so it's almost like in 1980 is the point at which Debbie gets this vision of what she wants to be when she grows up, even though she's already, past that. Let's see. Well, just coming into the Saturn
I
return.
have to tell you, 1980, the end of 1979 is when I got my real estate license.
Okay, thank you for that. And so then Saturn returns to where it was when you were born, 1981-ish. This is about, taking responsibility, whatever that means. But now we have a 14-year ride of Saturn going up to the top of the chart. It reaches the top of the chart in 1995. At this point in time, it's good news, bad news. Debbie has reached some level of pinnacle in her career, in her success, but it's almost frustrating because it's like, what do I do next? It's like the ladder runs out of rungs, can't climb any higher. And so this begins a period of consolidation. Do you relate to that at all?
I can totally relate to that. And the artistic stuff comes into play because I thought I started taking art classes and started doing a lot of artistic stuff. And I thought I wanted to be an artist and I have to sell my stuff to become an artist. And I realized, and it was so much damn work. I mean, well, wait, make $20,000. So I finally realized I am an artist. I don't need to sell it. So I kind of still did a lot of art on my own. But that was that shift that was right in that time.
I would imagine also, thank you for sharing that. And for those of you online that maybe didn't hear that, Debbie said that at that time she made a decision about artistic stuff that had been set aside and how to integrate it without turning it into your singular life focus. At that same time, through 1995, your Saturn is also coming across where the moon was when you were born. So one would imagine that there may have been a stressful, difficult situation, either in relationship or home or somehow, or whether it was just coming to grips with, I'm not going to do that, I'm going to do this. But that would be 95 into 96. Food for thought. But we want to watch that Saturn as it comes down toward the ascendant, which it does by 2003, 2004. And here we come to another change. It's almost like this is like another bump of fame and fortune, like Saturn at the top of the chart. And yet there may be a move here.
There was a change in my company and my home, everything right at that time. And that's when I started getting really super successful.
Okay. And here's an interesting thing, because when Saturn goes beneath the horizon for the next 6, 7, 8 years, as Saturn moves through that part of the chart, we're often successful, but we're not where we want to be in some way. We're doing it because it works, because we can learn, we can gather tools, we can gather stability, resources. And it's not about what I want to be in 20 or 30 years. It's about, I need to do this. For me, I began writing my daily horoscope column when Saturn hit my ascendant, and it changed my life, but I wasn't really thrilled about doing it, but it afforded me experience and safe harbor while I worked on my own stuff. And so we would look at that Saturn from roughly 2003-4 until Saturn reaches the bottom of the chart, which was in 2008, 2009. This is now putting the ladder on the ground and making another, this is where I want to go. This is the next round, so to speak, even though it might be a continuation of what you were doing. I would imagine here there's some vision that's launched that in that period of time, you begin what largely became your life from 2019. Watch that Saturn go upward all the way until Saturn reaches the top of the chart now, which is now beginning that next round of consolidation back when you had the art, am I going to do it for money or not kind of a thing. So
that's funny because I haven't done art, gosh, probably 10 years, a long time. And I just started thinking about it again. And I just took an art class for the first time in 10 years, like a month ago, and I thought, I want to get back into it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do more with that.
And again, from a larger scheme of things, and it might seem like this stuff is age related. Each of these things can happen at any ages in our lives. But this is for you a beginning of, it's an ending of your rising and climbing the ladder, and a beginning of your consolidating the position that you've gained and making it work for you. I kind of think of it as for 14 years, we climb a ladder. And then as Saturn reaches the very top of the chart, we're on a rung of a ladder and we build ourselves a horizontal domain of, we build a tree house where we are. We're not interested in climbing higher. We're now interested in living better where we are in this moment. And that creates the stability so that when Saturn hits the ascendant 7 years into the future, we have a stable base to work from as we make those changes. So anything else you want to share with us on any level?
No, that hits it right on. I mean, I haven't, and I'm an astrologer too, but I haven't really looked at those specific cycles.
And that particular thing of using Saturn cycles in that way comes from a man that's one of my favorite astrologers. He was a tenured English professor at Colgate College in New York. He retired early to pursue a full-time career as an astrologer, became the first editor of Horoscope magazine, and wrote one of the most popular books ever in astrology. I think it's in its 38th or 39th printing, called Astrology for the Millions. His name was Grant Louis. And this is something a technique that he used and wrote about. So thank you very much for sharing that. And we're not going to do a third chart. We just don't have time tonight. We've blown right through all of our Saturnian goals and limits and whatever. And so next month I will not be here, and I will be back July. I can't believe it. August 1st. I will be here on August 1st. And as you may know, online, I do a monthly also. And if you just go to YouTube, and you can find Rick Levine Astrologer, and I do a monthly, the first of every month. I just posted the June one yesterday, and it's already up around 11,000 views. So that's, it's pretty widely watched. It gets typically between 50 and 100,000 views a month. And so even though I won't be here next month, you can still watch that online. So thank you all. And if there's any other questions or anything, I'll be here for a few minutes. We don't have a lot of cleanup, but if those chairs over there, if they could be, you guys could help us out and bring them here, that'll save a few minutes for the wonderful baristas who are staying late for us. And go out there, be safe. And I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't end this with think cosmically, act locally. And to all of you online who are still here, in spite of everything, this is it. I will see you again in a couple of months. Thank you.